process, look at what is affordable. What matters most is that we get inflation down.
There'll be an inquiry into corruption following a crash at Brixton's O2 Academy in London. 2 people died after fans tried to enter an Ashake performance without tickets over a month ago. A number of allegations have been made about security, and the regulator says it takes all claims extremely seriously. Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley's admitted the force hasn't always vetted employees thoroughly enough after PC David Carrick admitted attacking a dozen women over the course of nearly 2 decades. The Prime Minister's ordered chief constables to check every officer against police databases to make sure no one slipped through the net. Falling fuel costs are largely behind a slowdown in the pace of price rises. Inflation has fallen slightly to 10.5%. In the city, the FTSE 100 is closed down 20 points at 78.30. The pound buys $1.23 and €1.14. LBC weather, some scattered snow showers in the west, a low of -6. Another cold day tomorrow with any showers easing and highs of 6 Celsius. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening to you and welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. With me on the panel this evening, to my left we have Wendy Chamberlain, Liberal Democrat MP for North East Fife and the party's Chief Whip. We have Paul Scully, Conservative MP for Sutton and Cheam, and Tech and the Digital Economy Minister at the Department for Culture. No, it's not culture media, it's digital
culture media sport. It's an extra D.
I can't keep up with these things. To my right, making her debut, is Satvir Kaur, Labour leader of Southampton City Council. She's a candidate, presumably in Southampton for the election. And Tony Diver, also making his debut on the programme, acting political editor of the Sunday Telegraph. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850, or you can use Alexa to send your question to us. Just say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And of course, we'd love you to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Now, if you're watching the programme, you can now see me put a badge on, which a listener very kindly sent me today, because I keep being recognised as Mick Lynch rather than Iain Dale. So this is a badge which says, I am not Mick Lynch, which I should be wearing on every train journey that I go on at the moment. So there we go. Let's go to our first call. It's from Sean in Consett. Hello, Sean.
How are you doing? You all right? How are you doing?
I'm very well. What would you like to ask?
Should the rapist copper get his pension? It's been on the news that there's been coppers on the news that yes, he should be entitled to it because he wasn't on duty. But I think it's an absolute disgrace if he gets it.
I think there is a regulation that says that, but the fact that he used his warrant card to reassure women that he was a policeman and that they were safe, I think that would probably negate that. I think Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, and the Home Secretary are looking into this. But let's go to our panel. Wendy Chamberlain.
You might be aware, Iain, that I'm a former police officer. I served for 12 years as a police officer, and I have to say I am disgusted and ashamed, I said this yesterday in the Chamber, at the actions of David Carrick. And, I'm in agreement with the Mayor of London and I believe the government in relation to this, because the reality is there were opportunities to stop David Carrick prior to him being appointed as a police officer in the first place, and second of all, multiple opportunities to deal with his offending whilst he was a police officer. So he was offending before he was a police officer, he was offending during the time he was a police officer. So his pension from that time should definitely be removed. And, I think when we look at this, there have been real failings here by the Metropolitan Police, and we need to look for action. At the end of the day, vetting's like an MOT. It's only valid on the day of issue. And it does suggest to me the Home Secretary's decision today in relation to rechecking vetting, etc., tells you that the vetting system currently doesn't work. And not only that, the continuing checks that are in place across the 43 forces in England and Wales and elsewhere don't work.
We do have a follow-up question on that, so we might talk about that in a little bit more detail. Now, let me play devil's advocate. I don't know if he's married with children or whatever, but say he is married and I think he's 48 years old. He would be eligible to retire from the police force in his 50s. Is it right to punish his wife, if he has one, for the fact that he's going to be in jail?
Well, I think the reality is he will have made pension contributions as an individual during his police service, and I would suggest that potentially there would be scope, if that were the case, to return those contributions. But I think, the level of offending and what we're looking at, and as I said yesterday in the Chamber, it's really important. Police officers are not employees. They are not subject to employment law. They are appointed, and that's via police regulations. It's in the government's power to make the changes that would potentially be required here.
Paul Scully, are those changes going to be made?
Well, look, I think, Wendy speaks a lot of sense from experience, and I can imagine police officers up and down the land will be equally as appalled by what's going on. And, we've got to put some pride back into to wearing badge, wearing the uniform, because it must be so desperate for people who just want to go out and do the right thing and look after, keep people safe when they see this. So I do think that, I take on your point about playing devil's advocate, but I do think that when you've had such an egregious violation of trust, then you probably should take the pension away there. But we are looking at making significant changes. I think there's already significant changes happening within the Metropolitan Police with the vetting that has been announced, the re-vetting. I wouldn't say that the existing vetting scheme is necessarily failing, because what I understand is that he wouldn't have passed the current vetting scheme. So he failed it. He passed it, obviously, when he was vetted. But I believe my understanding is that things have changed since then. But this will be uncovered when they go through all 45,000 officers. You represent a constituency within the Metropolitan Police. Yeah, I'm the Minister for London as well, so it's hugely important.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, how often are you getting communications from your constituents expressing concerns about this? Because I think there are many, many, many women in London who, up until the last year or two, have trusted the police, and it wouldn't have ever crossed their minds not to trust the police. And yet we've had these two terrible cases, and for all we know, there might be some more when these 800 people have been investigated. How concerned are your female constituents about this?
Well, it has come up on a number of occasions, and that's why, as a government, we've been doing a lot of work with the police specifically on violence against women and girls within the police, but also with the police, but also a wider scope as well, because it's so important that constituents feel safe, especially obviously women and girls who some may be travelling through London late at night, and they need to have that reassurance. So there's plenty more we need to do.
Satvir, there are 43 different police forces in the country. I think that's just in England. Do you feel that this is something that might be endemic in all of those police forces? I mean, do you get representations from constituents in Southampton about Hampshire Police, for example?
Well, I think anything that happens in London will naturally kind of have an impact elsewhere in the country. In Hampshire, for example, there's a huge fear of violence against women and girls. And actually, the problem we've got is that this system is heavily reliant on trust. And we've heard, from people on the panel, but also, throughout when we talk about this issue, is that trust has been eroded, and actually that's just not going to come back straight away. And yes, these checks and balances absolutely need to happen. It's terrifying. And I'm a younger woman, not a young woman, but it's absolutely terrifying that those that are there to protect you don't feel like you can trust them at a time when you are scared.
Tony Diver from the Telegraph, what about the politics of this? Because we've had a female Metropolitan Police Commissioner who was there for a number of years. We've had a succession of female Home Secretaries since 2010. And yet here we are. And to a lot of people, that it's very concerning that women at the top of politics, at the top of the Metropolitan Police, haven't been able to make a difference to this so far.
Well, that's right. I mean, but of course we expect the right approach to be taken towards women and girls from men and women who are at the top of politics. And I mean, I think it is important to point out here that Cressida Dick left her post as head of the Metropolitan Police in the wake of the Sarah Everard murder and everything that happened around that case. Mark Rowley came in. His stated aim was to review the processes in the Metropolitan Police to restore that trust of women and men in London, of everyone in London, around the way that the police operates. And pretty much straight away, another incident has happened again. So understandably, people on the streets will be saying, well, when I call 999, how can I trust that the person who comes to help me in whatever situation I'm in isn't actually going to be someone who's going to put me in a position of danger? And I think it goes beyond the police. It goes all around the country, like Satvir says, but we know there are also problems in the fire service. There's been a root and branch review of misogynistic behaviour in the fire service. And so I think there is political pressure on the Home Secretary and a government at the highest level to review these officers.
We've got to work quickly, haven't we? Because, I mean, there's clearly the vast majority of police officers are doing amazing work, and they would be horrified to see their name and their service sullied in this way. So we've got to give them some confidence that they can actually do their job, as well as women and girls.
Yeah, and the other point here is, if we've got 800 officers from the Met currently either suspended or on some kind of duties, that means they're not involved in operational policing. So actually, you're impacting on the capability and capacity of the Metropolitan Police to do their job, and we know that the public service is under huge pressure at the moment.
And I think that I was just going to say, I think the problem that you have, and I mean, you mentioned it as well, around how every time there's an incident, we do hear from government and we do hear from ministers that things are going to change, we're going to put processes in place, there's going to be reform, and nothing happens, and then there's another incident, and that's not helping with that trust.
No, of course it's not.
I mean, that's a fair criticism, I think, Paul, isn't it?
Well, look, I think, when you look in the Met Police, the Met Police is in special measures. We've got a police commissioner there, Satvir Kaur. I'm glad he's actually, speaking out about this now, but we've got to have him act as well, rather than just wagging fingers at government all the time. But clearly on this, we have to fill that void and act, and act we will. That's why the Home Secretary has been very strong this morning.
A text here from a Serving Police Federation rep who says, once you're dismissed, you lose all rights to a pension. He is entitled to have his contributions returned to him, but no other benefits. So let's take a follow-up question here. This is from Howard in Greenford. Howard, hello.
Yes, good evening, panel. I'd like your opinion on Satvir Kaur. Now, he's been in post 7 years, and how much responsibility do you think he bears for the demise of the Metropolitan Police while he's been in the job he's in now?
Satvir.
Oh, thanks.
You could end your political career right now.
I know, right here on LBC. I think Satvir Kaur is actually doing an incredible job and takes this issue extremely seriously. I know he's working very, very hard with local police. I'm not an expert on Met Police and the intricacies of it, but from a politician at the very top, taking it seriously. Like you said, it's not just women at the top, it has to be men at the top as well taking it seriously. I know that Satvir is.
Paul, you obviously will disagree with that. I mean, you are I was going to say shadow minister for London, yeah. So you see this on a day-to-day basis. What more could he have done?
Well, look, I struggle to actually find a single achievement of Satvir Kaur over his tenure as mayor, apart from wagging a finger at government or someone else over that period. So he's got Metropolitan Police.
Well, he did take leadership in getting rid of Cressida Dick, didn't he?
Yeah, and look what's happened to that. I mean, crikey, he was sitting there gaslighting the London Assembly when he had the critical press release of Tom Windsor, who was looking into that matter, when saying he hadn't seen it, when it was literally within 6 inches of his right hand, and Tom Windsor actually handed him the press release to show him. So it's pushing away responsibility.
But he showed leadership, and he did the right thing.
Well, he didn't act in the right way. I think that was what Tom Windsor...
Was he not right to get rid of her?
I think, if you look at what happened, what the police force actually thought at the time about how Cressida Dick was treated, it was... So
you wish she was still in post?
It was reactive. No, what I'm saying...
Answer the question. Do you wish she was still in post?
I'm saying it was the way that he acted. He was reactive because of a given situation. He should have actually dealt closer with the Home Secretary and actually given Cressida Dick at least the respect that she deserved for the post that she held. He failed to do that. He's now in a similar position with ULEZ, the ultra low emission zone that he's expanding. And as I say, he's not building enough houses, but he needs to take some responsibility as our police commissioner, as London's police commissioner, as well as mayor.
Wendy, I could give you a free pass on this, given that you're a Scottish MP and probably don't follow the intricacies of the Met.
But what I would say is, one of the things that we're lacking in Scotland now with a single police service is that three-legged stool of sort of accountability around the Chief Constable, Commissioner, central government and local government. And I suppose from the Metropolitan Police perspective, that still exists. And I think, dare I say, everybody then has to bear a degree of responsibility, whether that's the mayor or the government. I suppose for me, looking at it, given that the Metropolitan Police are in special measures and given that they have responsibilities that frankly impact on all of the UK police service when we think about counter-terrorism, etc., I do think there is a role for the UK government to be thinking about whether the Metropolitan Police is structured in the right way, because there is absolutely no doubt that we're in a position where this is the capital city of the UK and we have a police force that's in special measures but frankly too big to fail.
Tony?
Yeah, I think there is actually a boring political point here to make, which is that the accountability structures in the Metropolitan Police are not actually that obvious. And while Sadiq Khan is London's police commissioner, he doesn't have straightforward hiring and firing abilities over who leads the service. And inevitably, when something like this happens, you do get a degree of buck passing between politicians, going between Number 10, the Home Secretary, and City Hall, and indeed the police leadership. And of course, the government, whenever anything goes wrong with any police services, well, of course, the police have operational independence. It's not for us to interfere. At some point, it gets to a political level and they do have to interfere, and we sort of go round again. And I think, that probably is how the system is designed to work. But I think for the public, it's very difficult for people who have an emotional response and feel unsafe out on the streets to watch politicians passing the blame between them and think, actually, are they really taking it that seriously? Perhaps it's time for reform of the system so that there is a clear line of accountability.
It's worth, after a quarter of a century of London government, to actually test the governance structure, because actually lots of devolution around the country, devolution deals around the country, people are asking for London mayor-like powers. Now, we ought to actually test, are those powers structured in the right way?
The London mayor wants more powers as well.
That's
the thing.
Does the Minister for London want powers?
I think let's see where he gets with Mayor's Question Time after he's misled.
How much interaction do you have as Minister for London with the mayor?
I have a reasonable amount, because to be fair, we do work well together in certain areas. He's got the mandate to oversee that devolved power in London. So it's my job partly to help him have the levers of power in national government to be able to deliver that. But I do then need to hold him to account for government's national priorities.
Why are you Minister for London when you're in the DCMS?
I was Minister for London when I was in Business Minister and in Levelling Up. It comes as a London MP, does it, because it joins the dots up. It's not a delivery role per se, not like my digital and digital economy, when I'm looking at the online safety bill, about gambling review, about AI strategy and semiconductors, delivering in that way. It's more of a joining the dots role, because, as I say, the Mayor of London has his power, has his mandate, as do the borough leaders and the councils as well.
Robert in Norwich says, Ian, it's better to be mistaken for Mick Lynch than Andrew Marr being mistaken for Vladimir Putin when visiting Russia, according to his book My Trade. I'd forgotten about that, but that's absolutely right. He was. God, imagine the power of Vladimir Putin there. Right, let's move on. We're going to take more of your questions in just a moment. The number to call, 0345 6060 973. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Let me remind you who's on our panel. Paul Scully is Minister for London, Wendy Chamberlain, Liberal Democrat Chief Whip, Satvir Kaur, Labour Leader of Southampton City Council, and Tony Diver, Acting Political Editor of the Sunday Telegraph. It's about time they made the gig permanent, isn't it, Tony? If there's anything I can do as a columnist, let me know.
Yeah, I'm covering for an excellent colleague. I wouldn't...
Satvir, let me just ask you a question about your job as leader of Southampton City. I mean, Southampton is a big city. What's the main challenge in your role as leader of the council?
At the moment, it's cost of living crisis. It's kind of, we're almost at the front line, and we actually were having this conversation before we came on, how actually the repercussions of whatever happens in Westminster is felt by councils up and down the country. At the moment, budgets are a huge issue, hence why councils are going bankrupt. What we do need is kind of stability from Westminster, so it can filter down the investment that we desperately need. Most councils have been cut by something like 60p in every pound. It's just not sustainable. Like, councils will go under unless there's proper investment and reform.
And I imagine, Paul, stability is something you'd quite like to see after the last 12 months.
Oh, for sure. No, definitely. And look, I used to be a councillor myself. I was an opposition leader in Sutton, and things have got tougher for local authorities, no doubt about that. When I was actually over the summer in the Levelling Up Department looking after local government finance, and
lucky you.
Oh, absolutely. I never really found
How many days?
It's about 6 weeks, but I never really found that after dinner joke that really nailed local government finance, which is why they shuffled me to tech. So now in tech, I can get ChatGPT to write a joke for me. But the serious point is that we've been trying to give as much certainty as we can, given the difficult situation we have with the local government finance settlement. We've also been calling out some councils, not talking about Southampton, but some councils who have actually been investing in some slightly strange areas, really. That's really come home to roost with some poor investment decisions. When people actually,
Thurrock in particular.
Absolutely. I was with Secretary of State, and I spoke to Thurrock, and as we called Essex County Council in to oversee the change and the recovery, because it's in a bad position. But we want to make sure that councils can focus on what they need to do exactly as we've
Well, that investment will help. I think the reason why councils have tried to become more adventurous is because they're getting less money from central government, but the need and the demand in local communities is going up, so they're going to have to make up that money somehow. And so many times, the cuts come from government, but actually it's local councils that have to carry it out.
Right, we could continue this debate, but we're going to move on to a different subject with Jay in St Ives in Cambridgeshire. Hello, Jay.
Good evening, panel. Yeah, my question is, we trust teachers with our children's education. Why can't we trust their judgment to strike?
That's an interesting one. Tony, let's come to you first.
Well, I'm trying to think what you're getting at there with that question. Is that the Conservative response to teachers striking, which is to say there haven't been enough of them who are giving their views on it? I mean, 53%, I think it was the figure that was being put around by the Education Secretary yesterday. I mean, of course, this is a hugely difficult issue because parents will find themselves, not being able to go to work, having to organise childcare, and that clearly is, the purpose of the strikes, is to cause as much inconvenience as possible. I think the government is going to have to really sort out some form of negotiating strategy which it can use in all of these strikes. The interesting point, I think, is that the government has not actually faced strikes on this level for many, many years. The only person in government who's got that sort of negotiating experience, bizarrely, is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, who dealt with all of the junior doctor strikes as Health Secretary and back under the coalition. But the strategy at the moment does appear to be the same strategy that the government's used in negotiating Brexit, which is hold back for as long as possible. They will move, and then eventually come to some sort of settlement at the 11th hour. But I think the problem that the government has is you risk empowering the unions if you do that, because you get the sort of copycat strike action that we've seen. The unions are openly admitting that they're coordinating what they're doing, and that risks just dragging this issue out for months and months. So clearly this will be a massive blow for parents, the news that teachers are striking, but I think that there's pressure on government as well as on teachers to do something about that.
And Wendy, in Scotland, there have already been teacher strikes, haven't there?
My 15-year-old son was having a long lie this morning because he has not had a full week at school this year, and obviously there were strikes prior to Christmas as well. So this isn't an issue that's limited to England and Wales. I think it is emblematic of the cost of living crisis that a number of professions are feeling the squeeze, and I suppose the government's response, I think, has backfired in relation to the minimum strikes legislation, because what was the response when they announced that? The coordination that you just mentioned has started. And, actually, you can agree that you saw that with the ambulance strikes. The ambulance trusts agreed to minimum standards. And so it does very much feel to me like a sort of sledgehammer to catch it, and actually has not had the intended effect of bringing people back round the table. The legislation that the government bringing forward are not dealing with the issues now, and parents, patients and others are...
What about Jay's question, though, about we trust teachers with our children, so shouldn't we trust their judgment when they say they need to go on strike?
Well, they have made the decision to go on strike. They've balloted, and they are going to do so. I suppose the issue is why are they striking, and why have the government not reached negotiated with them accordingly?
Paul.
Well, I mean, first of all, just to answer Wendy's point, that we've always said that the minimum service requirements doesn't affect this particular action for any number of reasons. In fact, it actually doesn't deter people from their right to strike, as we can see in France at the moment, when they already have this legislation and they're seeing strike action across the board. But to talk to Tony's point, we do want to work with the teachers. We want to be able to, we have an open door for the teachers' unions.
Well, they ran with Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, today, and complete stalemate.
Well, but we have to carry on talking to try and find a way through. At the end of the day, teachers. Average teacher salary, something like £39,500. There's 20% on top of that for contributions for pensions, and actually the actuarial assessments, because of the people leaving teachers' pensions, is that's going to reach 40% at some point unless we have radical reform there. Teachers are really interested in workload as well. That's been something that's been around for a long time. So we need to look at the whole gamut of what teachers are offered. But
can I just remind you, you have been in power for 12 and a half years, and the retention crisis in the education sector is worse than it's ever been.
But to answer the core question about trusting, I don't really agree with the premise of Jay's question.
Okay, well, answer my question.
Look, I think at the end of the day, as I say, we need to look at the workload is a particular issue that teachers, I think, have been calling for reform for some time, and I think it is something that we need to look at alongside pay and other conditions. And I think this is the time to do that. That's why we need Gillian. Her offer to keep speaking to the unions. I hope the unions carry on with that. But in terms of just the trust, as I say, I think teachers at the end of the day, they are striking because of their terms, their conditions. I know, everything they do should and is for children, but the strike action decision is taken for themselves, and it will affect children. They've already had several days off during COVID, and we've seen the effect of children going through that. Children need to be in school.
Satvir, when you look at the fact that the NEU voted to go on strike, but they weren't much over the threshold, several other teaching unions didn't reach the threshold, is there really an enthusiasm for this strike?
I mean, I've been a chair of governors for a local infant school for quite some time. Staff have been really struggling. I completely agree. It's a kind of deep-rooted problem, but you have been in government for 13 years, so there's no point saying we have to act now. You should have acted years ago. With that one, I think it's been a combination of lots of things that's kind of led to this, but also the fact that actually nobody, whether you're a teacher or a nurse or an ambulance driver, nobody chooses and wants to strike. They do it as a measure of last resort. And I talk to people on the doorstep all the time, and I completely agree with Wendy. This whole approach to strike in the public sector in particular is completely backfiring. People aren't blaming teachers or nurses or ambulance drivers and other people striking. Actually, they're blaming the government and actually saying that talking about kind of minimum measures, and it's just not washing with people. People are rightfully saying there's deep-rooted problems. You've had 13 years to fix it. There's no point just blaming workers that have been struggling for years and are reaching breaking point right now.
But it's more than that, because at the end of the day, the minimum service requirement is really there to make sure that other people, in the same way that Tony was talking about, are affected as little as possible.
So why not apply it to teachers?
In terms of certain core services, because otherwise, as Tony says, it does affect the wider economy. People's childcare is always difficult. But we've effectively switched off the economy for 2 years during COVID, and that's had global impact on inflation. It's had a tight labour market, which has also created inflation. The risk is. Obviously, all of these factors have stoked inflation. Inflation seems to, a lot of economists are talking about the fact it's peaked, but there's no guarantee it's going to carry on coming down at the rate we all want it to. We have to make sure that we're acting responsibly as a government so that we're not stoking inflation further with a...
Why not come to a deal whereby you say, OK, look, we can't give you inflation this year. We've offered 5%. We can't give you the 10 point... Well, I think they're asking for more than that, aren't they? But let's say we can offer 7% this year, but what we are committed to do is within a certain period, whether it's, 2 years, 5 years, whatever, we will restore your salaries to at least the level they were before austerity started. So at least people know, back to your point about certainty, at least people know where they stand. And I think if the unions felt there was a commitment on the behalf of government to do something like that, we might be in a very different place.
Well, this is what I'm talking about, having a holistic approach to talks, because, I don't know what Gillian was speaking to at the unions today, but, you do have to have a long-term plan for teachers and other sectors' pay. But I also think you do need to include some of the other areas as well, because if you're actually having a long-term plan, talking exactly as you say, but then teachers' pensions contributions go up to 40% because TPS is becoming more and more unaffordable, then that's going to add extra pressure.
OK. Right, we will move on. Thank you very much indeed for your question, Jay. It's 8:31. News headlines on LBC with, I think it's Charlotte Morgan.
As nurses continue today's strike, we now know they'll be joined by ambulance workers from the GMB union for further industrial action on February the 6th for potentially the biggest day of walkouts in the history of the NHS. Health Secretary Steve Barclay insists the country can't afford a large rise in salary. There'll be an inquiry into corruption following a crowd crush at Brixton's O2 Academy in London in which 2 people died. A number of allegations have been made and the private security regulator says it takes all claims extremely seriously. And the Metropolitan Police Commissioner has admitted they haven't always vetted employees thoroughly enough. PC David Carrick admitted attacking a dozen women over the course of nearly 2 decades, and the Prime Minister's ordered chief constables to check every officer against police databases. LBC weather, some scattered snow showers in the west, an overnight low of -6. Another cold and mainly dry day tomorrow with highs of 6 Celsius.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Well, let me reintroduce my panel to you. Wendy Chamberlain is the Liberal Democrat Chief Whip. Paul Scully is Minister for London. Satvir Kaur is Labour Leader of Southampton City Council. And Tony Diver is Acting Political Editor of the Sunday Telegraph. Well, we have a text question from Jennifer in Sheffield. The planned online safety law could lead to bosses of the social media sites going to jail for not taking down stuff harmful to kids. But who's deciding what is harmful to children and how? I should point out that apparently Donald Trump is coming back to Twitter. It was announced today. Obviously no connection with the question, but sort of. Paul, let's come to you first, as this is your area of responsibility.
Yeah, so what we have is that the strongest protections within the online safety bill remain for children. So anything that is illegal, obviously, has to be removed. We have a series of proposed priority content that, again, needs to be removed for children, especially these when you're looking at areas like bullying and harassment and these kind of things, which essentially should be and are in the bigger platforms of social media platforms and other internet service providers within their own terms and conditions. So that's really where we are pushing them to enforce those terms and conditions. What we are looking at in terms of senior management liability, the first bit of the question there is, and this was the discussion that we were having with Miriam Cates, Bill Cash, my colleagues, is to make sure that we've got a robust structure so that we can find the companies, yes, and you're talking about in the billions. I mean, there's a lot of money, the 10% of their global turnover, but going further, that if someone is willfully disregarding that, the regime that is only essentially pretty well getting them to enforce their own terms and conditions, then they should rightly be able to have criminal liability as well. For adults, it's slightly different because we've taken away that legal but harmful.
But who decides what is harmful, and who decides who's got to take?
So we have a list of as with the bill goes through, we'll have a list of priority content, things like, as I say, that bullying and harassment. The companies themselves will also have their terms and conditions that they'll have to adhere to. Ofcom will be making sure that they actually adhere to that regime, so they will be the ones making the judgment calls. We haven't made it technology specific about how they, and overly prescriptive about how they go through that process, because frankly, by the time the bill even gets royal assent, it'll be out of date because of technology change.
But won't they always find a way around these regulations? Because unless it's international, unless you get international agreement from all other countries to do exactly the same thing, surely somebody who sets up a Facebook group in this country to advise kids how to self-harm, for example, I mean, that would come under your criteria here. They could just go and set it up in Facebook in Colombia or somewhere.
No, because if it's coming to the UK, if it's been, it's where it's been seen. So if it's in the UK, then it comes under the regime, and Meta will then have to remove it on that basis. It might be a Facebook group wherever it is.
But is this something that they would have to do at the behest of your department or the behest of individual private citizens?
So they will have to, first of all, the company will have to have a risk register for children, so they'll have to look at these possible harms, and so they can then come up with the terms and conditions and a full explanation of that risk register, not just for the children and the users themselves, but for their parents, because their parents obviously can then be better informed, so they're able to have that media literacy, as it's known, but advising the children what they're getting into and how to police it themselves. But it'll be Ofcom that will be monitoring the regime and the technology that they're using, how to remove it. They have to have a clear reporting requirement as well, and then they have to adhere to it.
If Wendy finds, I mean, she mentioned she's got a 15-year-old son, and she finds her son on a site that she regards as a site that he shouldn't be allowed to be on, beyond telling him to get off the site, and she wants the site closed down, what does she do as a private citizen?
She will have to, at the moment it's really opaque how to get in touch with some of the big companies. They will have to have a really clear reporting requirement that Wendy can then approach and be able to demonstrate how that is working. What we're not going to do is set up an ombudsman to look at each and every individual complaint. That would be quite unwieldy, but there will be the ability to have what's called a super complaint. So if the regime that whichever company is not is using isn't working properly, and that's not getting taken down, and it's still opaque, then Ofcom can act.
Wendy, as a parent and as a politician, what do you make of all of that?
I feel that I would end up writing to my MP for assistance.
Exactly, I was just thinking exactly the same thing.
And I think, to be honest, and I do accept, this is obviously always a fast-moving environment and what Paul says about being to date, but I think there's no doubt that this online safety bill has been going for some time and has been subject to the merry-go-round that we have had of government ministers over the last wee while. And I think the other aspect for me is Paul mentioned some of his colleagues there in the amendment they tabled. What we're seeing from the new Prime Minister is, not to sort of face off rebels in the division lobbies, but to come to some agreement with them. And I think the danger with that is that we now potentially have a lack of clarity about what exactly the agreement that you've come to, Paul, with your backbenchers, which you say that the things around here are opaque, and obviously I took my decisions in relation to how I voted last night, but I'm not feeling incredibly confident that we're not still in an opaque position.
I think we were quite specific, actually, because we weren't that far apart, actually. What government were proposing, we wanted to make sure that if you're having criminal liability, you have to have something to hang that criminal proceedings on. And by having a sort of flexible, less prescriptive kind of bill, unlike the European Union style bill, then it's really difficult to actually get a prosecution. So you have to have it. You have to hang it on something, some sort of deliberate act. So what we've said, we'll work with them, and we'll work with anybody, frankly, to make sure that we get something right based on the Irish model. And because you talked in about international approach to this, and there are lots of countries looking at what we are doing. Ironically, and because frankly, yes, this has taken a long time. Ireland have nicked a lot of our bill, but it's taken so long they've lapped us. So we've, but we're there. We're pretty well there now. And but you still got Australia and even America are looking at what we're doing, because this, frankly, is still groundbreaking. We're first movers in this area, so we will have to adapt and flex.
If we've been lapped, that suggests that, as Jennifer's text says, that actually we're not protecting children now.
No, I was half joking, because the Irish system is literally being implemented as we speak.
Tony, going back to Jennifer's question, she thinks that it could lead to the bosses of social media sites going to jail for not taking down stuff harmful to kids. She says, who's deciding what is harmful to children? Well, in the end, it's the parents, I suppose, that decide. Do you think the way that this is going to be set up is going to be workable?
Well, I think the problem with the process that Paul's explained is that it is unwieldy. I mean, clearly the government has to try and produce the most simple system it can, but we're dealing here with multinational companies with thousands of employees. You're dealing with content that's being posted sort of almost as fast as you can read it, much faster than you can read it in most cases. And the system basically relies on a reporting mechanism, which may sort of much, much, much further down the line lead to someone going to prison. The question is, does that actually help the person who sees it in the first place? And the answer presumably is no. And so what the government is relying on here is a system which over a long period of time produces an incentive for these companies to do more to deal with this sort of content, so that the children of 20 years' time aren't looking at content that children now can. And maybe it's not 20 years, maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 5 years. But the point is, it's not a light switch that the government has that they can turn it on and off. As Paul points out, and clearly as everyone knows, these companies move so quickly. I mean, we only got to look at what's happened with Twitter in the last year to see that quite often a change of leadership in these companies leads to massive policy changes in terms of what's being policed on the ground. Significantly less is being policed on Twitter than it previously was. How exactly would the government's model deal with that? Does Elon Musk go to prison, and how long does it take?
Tony, there's a layer before that reporting mechanism, because obviously, as I say, Ofcom have to be satisfied that the systems are in place to preempt the need to report for the fact that them to be able to take down those posts themselves as they discover it before you see it. Exactly that. But you talk about Elon Musk, and there is an impetus here from the free market. There was a joke doing the rounds that how do you end up with a multi-million-pound company? You sell it to Elon Musk for £44 billion. million because if you have a company,
you're full of jokes tonight,
absolutely.
Very dangerous.
I'm here till Thursday. But if you have a situation like Elon Musk has come in and made some rapid changes, you've also seen a fleeing of advertisers as well, and so those big main platforms do need to have a breadth of audience to stay as big as they are.
Ben on a text says, I have epilepsy and want to praise Paul Scully and the DCMS for finally banning epilepsy trolling in the online safety bill. People with epilepsy get viciously trolled online and this will protect them. I mean, it would never have occurred to me that anyone with epilepsy would be trolled online. It's just...
And some of it is actually quite horrendous. Absolutely. And some of it is deliberate. It's really quite horrible.
Satvir.
Well, I'm listening to this debate, and actually the politicians in the Commons seem confused by it, despite you saying it's very clear, Paul. The media seem really confused by it. The people on the doorstep are not going to have a hope in hell to know what is going on and how they're meant to proceed with it, and that's probably my biggest concern at the moment.
But the principle of it, you think, is a good one?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, children do need to be protected. There's, mental health in young people is massively going up. And, I see it in my nieces and nephews at the moment. And, something has to be done. But it does need to be administered right. And at the moment, I don't think we're there yet.
Right. We'll move on in just a moment. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. It's 8:46.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Paul Scully, Wendy Chamberlain, Tony Diver and Satvir Kaur with us. Satvir, I'm going to ask you another question at the beginning of this section. You introduced Keir Starmer at the Labour Party conference for his big speech last year, which is where I first saw you. It was a terrific performance. I mean, the adrenaline was clearly flowing because you were quite
I was
excited,
so nervous, but very excited. Yes.
I mean, what kind of reaction did you get? I mean, how did you come to do it?
I got a phone call 2 days before, actually, and I initially said no because I was absolutely terrified, and it's actually my partners that said, "Are you an idiot? Please do this. It's a great opportunity." So yeah, I loved it. I think my brief was, can you just inspire people? And I was like, oh my God, I've got 3 minutes to do that. And it lasted longer, which I wasn't anticipating, but thankfully people, and it's a lovely problem to have, but clapping after each line. So no, it was really fantastic. I got really
I think you got more applause than he did.
No, I was sat by his wife, so no. No, I mean, Kit's speech was great. It was a great, it was a huge privilege and honour to be able to do it. Clearly people at conference really enjoyed it. I think I ended by trying to persuade people to join the Labour Party and get more involved. And actually, when I was back on the doorsteps, people clearly saw it and are getting more engaged with the Labour Party and are getting more involved.
Well, the great thing is that, I mean, if the polls are right and you win the next election, there's a big Labour majority, and you have all these sort of hundreds of new Labour MPs. I don't mean new Labour, I mean new Labour MPs. At least he knows who you are.
I didn't even get to see him. I only found out, I think it was like minutes before, that rather than introducing Keir, I was introducing a video that then was going to lead to Keir. So, yeah, we didn't cross paths at all, but I got a lovely letter afterwards to thank me.
I should think so too. Yeah. Right, let's go to another call. It's Chris in Richmond. Hi, Chris.
Good evening, in panel. Has the Scottish Government or the UK Government got it right when it comes to Scottish Gender Recognition Bill?
Are you talking about the contents of it or the blocking of it?
Well, I mean both really. I yes. I think has the British government got it right to block the bill? I think they have.
Right. I'm going to ask for relatively short answers so we can fit another question in before the end of the hour. Wendy, as you are our Scottish resident panellist here, the floor is yours.
Well, I think I would obviously say that I don't think the UK government have got it right here, and one of the reasons for that is my MSP colleagues in the Scottish Parliament did support this bill when it passed before Christmas. The reality is a Section 35 order has never been placed before in the history of devolution in the Scottish Parliament since 1999. So I suppose you have to ask why this bill and why now. And the SNP have been standing up calling this a threat to devolution, and the irony is the SNP don't believe in devolution. They want to break up the UK. So I think it's a very risky strategy by the UK government. Lord Hope has said, and I know you wanted a short answer, but Lord Hope has said that he thinks the Scottish government's chances of taking this forward legally are slim. But Lord Falconer said yesterday that he felt that the list of reasons that the UK government had given was also thin. It's quite clear that this is going to go to the courts, and that's where the decision is going to end. But I do think that this is a risky strategy from the UK, because anything that potentially threatens the future of the UK is giving the SNP an opportunity.
Tony Diver, is this a political issue, or do you think it's inevitably going to become a legal one?
Well, I mean, it's clear that it is going to become a legal issue in the interim, but I think actually people in Westminster are looking ahead to the next general election and thinking about what the impacts might be there. I mean, there is a divide on this issue. Do you consider it an issue to be about gender recognition, or is it fundamentally about devolution? I mean, the SNP have a massive political incentive to stoke up tension around devolution and around the distribution of powers between the two governments ahead of the next election. They want to renew their mandate in Scotland, which is currently very strong. They want to push out the Tories, and there are certainly those on the Tory benches who would argue that's exactly what this is about.
I would also say that the Scottish Conservatives had a free vote in the Scottish Parliament on this bill, and indeed 3 members of the party voted for it, including their former leader Jackson Carlow. If they believe that this bill does infringe on UK reserved powers, why did they give a free vote in the Scottish Parliament?
I'd always say free votes are a very good thing generally.
Well,
I know as a chief whip you wouldn't,
from a whip perspective, you would think if they thought that.
Okay, Satvir.
So I'm not an expert on the intricacies of obviously Scottish politics, but and hopefully others think like this as well. I don't understand how we've got to this point where we're in a constitutional crisis. Clearly, both sides should have known that if we went down this route, this is how it was going to end up, and those conversations could have and should have happened, rather than having a big drama about the Constitution, when actually there's a really important issue. within there around trans people and trans right, which is just, again, becoming at the forefront of stuff and is becoming a political football, which is really unfair.
Paul?
No, I think we have got it right, because essentially having two sort of regimes of obtaining gender recognition certificates across the UK does rub up against each other quite quickly, and I think that was acknowledged by the then Scottish government back in, I think it was 2004, when the Act was going through, when they gave legislative consent motion towards that bill, recognising the fact that two regimes would be really difficult for employers in other areas.
Right, I'm going to give you a challenge. Chris, thank you for that. The next question, I need 30-second answers from you. David Poole sends a text in saying, does Jeremy Clarkson deserve to lose all his TV work for one ill-judged article about Meghan Markle? Well, Amazon are threatening to end production of Clarkson's Farm and the Grand Tour because the viewing figures in America are very low. ITV say they have no further commitments to him for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Satvir?
I think it's down to media outlets whether they want to use Clarkson or not. I think it was...
Do you?
Well...
as a media consumer?
I mean, I don't read Jeremy Clarkson very, very often. I do think that people do need to watch what they write, and, it will have consequences. I mean, clearly it's going to have a consequence on his pay pack, isn't it?
Tony?
Yeah, well, it's a risky territory getting into commenting on what other journalists are writing. I do read and enjoy Jeremy Clarkson's column in the Sunday Times and in the Sun. I mean, clearly it's a decision for Amazon to take. We don't actually, it's worth saying, know exactly what the outcome of this is going to be yet. But
do you think he deserves to lose his programmes for one ill-judged column?
Well, I mean, it's up to them to decide. I don't think necessarily we should sit here.
You're not going to stab a fellow journalist in the back.
No, I'm not going to.
Paul?
Daft thing for him to have said, I hate cancel culture in general, but actually it goes back to the example that I was using of when we're talking about online harms, about companies actually having that free market approach with advertisers, because it's the advertisers that are pulling away from this, presumably making their judgment.
Wendy?
I wouldn't necessarily say it was simply a daft thing to say. We started this programme talking about the Metropolitan Police and David Carrick and violence against women and girls, and he was inciting violence against somebody that people have a very strong opinion about. But clearly in this circumstance the market has spoken, and Clarkson would be quick to defend the market, so sometimes you have to take the consequences of that.
Right, final fun caller, it says here, from Bob in Harrow. Bob, you're going to ask a fun question, I gather.
Ian and the panel, good evening. Suzanne Jebb, the chair of the Food Standards Agency, has barred cake in the workplace. Are we going to turn our workplaces into ghettos? Or should we have cake?
We're going to be talking about this in the next hour, so don't
that
go
joke was
anywhere.
better than Paul's.
Very good. Paul, do you bring cakes for your civil servants?
I have brought my entire uneaten chocolate and cake collection from Christmas in, so my civil service, my private office, tell me they love the cake, so we can have cake and eat it.
Fantastic. Sound like Boris Johnson. Wendy?
Actually, my researcher in Parliament is dairy intolerant, so cake's not really an option. But, I think people can make their own choices. If you choose to bring cake in, people can take the choice not to eat it.
Satvir?
Cake, love cake, more cake the better. If you don't want cake in the office, don't eat it. It can stay there and someone else can have another helping. Also, if you have a slice of cake, just go for a walk or go for a jog afterwards if you're really concerned. I don't think you should bar people from having cake. Big cake fan.
Tony?
Is this the first major political controversy from the Food Standards Agency this year? What else are they going to ban next? No, I think people should be able to eat cake if they want to, bring it in for their colleagues. We do it all the time, it's quite right.
Well, don't go anywhere, because that is something we're going to spend the next hour talking about. This is slightly more nuanced than the initial stories suggested. I feel a bit sorry for Susan Jebb, because I think she has been slightly overinterpreted. But we're going to have a go anyway in the next hour. Thank you very much to Paul Scully, Wendy Chamberlain, Satvir Kaur and Tony Diver. We'll invite you all back. You've been brilliant guests tonight. Thank you very much indeed. So, as I say, we are going to talk about the comments of Professor Susan Jebb, the head of the Food Standards Agency, about whether people should be eating cake at work. I mean, I feel as if it's Groundhog Day here, because yesterday we at 9 o'clock we talked about something similar where people were trying to tell us all how to use language. Did we really need to be told that we shouldn't eat too much cake, that people